Hugh Nibley has dealt with the Egyptian traditions about the goddess who discovered Egypt rising out of the floodwaters. In one text, she is called daughter of Ptah, which is noted above as one possible meaning of the name Zeptah. In some accounts, she is Isis, sister, wife to Osiris, both sister and wife, and mother of Horus, the first king of Egypt, making one wonder if Egyptus married her own brother, Mitzrayim, who is the son of Ham mentioned in the Bible, and after whom Egypt takes its name in Hebrew. Nibley draws attention to the account of Heraclides, which was unavailable to Joseph Smith, who wrote, "It was first a woman named Egyptia who established her son and introduced weaving. Because of her, the Egyptians set up an image of Athena, the Greek goddess, as Eporus says in his work on Europa." About 440 BC, the Greek historian Herodotus wrote that the Egyptian priest, quote, "told me that the first man who ruled over Egypt was Min, and that in his time all Egypt above the Thebaic Nome, that's Thebes, was a marsh, and another land below Lake Moeris, then showing itself above the surface of the water." In his chronicle, the 6th century AD Christian historian John Malalas wrote that, quote, "the first king of Egypt belonged to the tribe of Ham, Noah's son. He was Pharaoh, who was called Necho." While Malalas evidently confused the Pharaoh of Abraham's time with the Pharaoh Necho of the 6th century BC, the time of King Josiah, it is interesting that Abraham, chapter 1, verses 20 to 21, notes that Pharaoh signifies king by royal blood. Now this king of Egypt, he says, was a descendant of the loins of Ham and was a partaker of the blood of the Canaanites by birth. I have to keep looking for the little buttons and making sure. I don't see this here, by the way. It doesn't display on the computer up here, which is why I keep staring over there. So the only way I know if it's keeping up with me or vice versa. One of the Kirtland Egyptian papers notes that Abraham was, quote, "forewarned of God to go down into Amestra, or Egypt, and preach the gospel unto the Amestrans." The word may be related to the Hebrew Mitzrayim, sounds a bit like it, the name for Egypt and for one of Ham's sons, who is the eponymous ancestor of the Egyptians in Genesis chapter 10 and 1 Chronicles chapter 1. The Hebrew is actually a dual form, as reflected by the suffix ayim, so Mitzrayim really means two Egypts, if you will, due to the fact that ancient Egypt was considered to be comprised of two parts, Upper and Lower Egypt, that were subsequently united. Eusebius declared that Mesraim was indeed the founder of the Egyptian race, and from him the first Egyptian dynasty must be held to spring. As noted earlier, Eusebius also identified Egyptus with Mesraim. If, as the book of Abraham says, Egyptus was a daughter of Ham rather than a son, it is possible that she married her brother, just as the Egyptian traditions have. Isis marries her brother Osiris. And from them would derive the Hebrew name of Egypt. This would explain the Egyptian myths about Osiris, the god who actually ruled Egypt anciently, marrying his sister, and that was followed by some of the pharaohs. In fact, some of the pharaohs, in order to make sure that they were marrying into the royal line, married not only their sisters, but sometimes their daughters. And I know at least one case where one married his mother. It's really a strange idea from our point of view, but it was perfectly normal in their days. They wanted to preserve this particular line. The term ralenos is found in Abraham chapter 1, verse 14, and indicates that it means hieroglyphics, referring to one of the writing systems used in ancient Egypt. The word hieroglyphos is Greek and means sacred or priestly writing. Perhaps it equates to Egyptian Ra-Nes, which would mean the tongue or speech of Ra, Ra being the Egyptian sun god and head of the pantheon in the city of On, or Heliopolis, sun city, not Arizona, Egypt. I should apologize for those who know how Egyptian is written, but the fonts I used will not let me stack these properly, so you have to read it all the way across the line. And that's, I guess, probably only for John Gee, I don't know. The Egyptian N often corresponds to the Semitic El. The same is true also of the R. The Egyptian R is sometimes used for the Semitic El when it transliterates Semitic words, Hebrew, Canaanite, whatever. And in fact, sometimes the two are used together to denote an El. So when we look at Nes here from the Egyptian, it could easily be Las, Ras, any of those. Lashon, therefore, and Lisan, I believe to be cognate with the Egyptian word. On the surface, this Egyptian explanation does seem to fail because Abraham chapter 1, verse 14 says that the system of Egyptian characters, called figures in that passage, is called by the Chaldeans Ralenos, which signifies hieroglyphs. So, according to the book of Abraham, these are actually Chaldean. This is a Chaldean name, not the Egyptian name. But one of the manuscripts of the book of Abraham says it was called that by the Egyptians. And then the word Egyptian is crossed out and Chaldean is written above it. So it seems to me that originally it was perhaps intended to denote Egyptian. A number of Latter-day Saint scholars have taken in hand to provide ancient etymologies for the names of the Egyptian gods described in the book of Abraham. The earliest was Hugh Nibley, followed, actually there were some who did it before him, followed in the late 1960s and early 1970s by Robert F. Smith, whose work, though mostly unpublished, has, in my opinion, stood the test of time. John Gee and others have more recently re-examined the names and come to similar conclusions. John M. Lundquist also noted that each of the gods or idols mentioned in Abraham 1:17 appears in the compilation of some 3,800 Mesopotamian deities published in 1950 by Anton Demel. Many of these names are Akkadian, a Semitic language related to Hebrew and more distantly to Egyptian. Critics often dismiss the four gods depicted below the lion couch, in facsimile one of the book of Abraham, as mere canopic jars in which the viscera of a deceased person were placed during the mummification process. They put the heart and the viscera and things in there. The only part of the body they threw away and did not mummify was the brain. They didn't know that's what made you think. In fact, they extracted the brain. They had a little hooked instrument they'd put up through the nostril, and they'd pull the brain out piece by piece. The procedure is very similar to abortion, by the way. Scary, huh? Well, at least if you're dead, you don't feel it. Well, it's true that these were canopic jars and that the various body parts were placed in them. These do depict the four gods known as the sons of Horus, though one text calls them the sons of Osiris. And indeed, in facsimile 2 figure 6, which I've had here in an insert, Joseph Smith describes them as representing this earth in its 4 quarters. Some of the sons of Horus were in fact associated with the cardinal directions, and we'll see this in our description of each of them. There was a kind of a strange thing going on in 1912 with the Reverend Spalding, who asked several Egyptologists to comment on this, and Samuel A.B. Mercer came back and he said, "Oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about, this Joseph Smith. These aren't the 4 quarters of the earth. These are the 4 cardinal directions, not quarters. It's a real difference." However, another Egyptologist, Budge, whom some of you have heard of also, he translated as quarters, 4 quarters instead of 4 cardinal directions. Well, let's look at each.